Alright, Matthew 5:33 through 37. Again, ye have heard that it hath been said by them of old time, Thou shalt not forswear thyself, but shalt perform unto the Lord thine oaths. But I say unto you, swear not at all, neither by heaven, for it is God's throne, nor by the earth, for it is his footstool, neither by Jerusalem, for it is the city of the great King. Neither shalt thou swear by thy head, because thou canst not make one hair white or black. Let your communication be yea, yea, nay, nay, for whatsoever is more than these cometh of evil. And I'm just going to read the entire chapter from the Westminster Confession on Lawful Oaths and Vows. A lawful oath is part of religious worship, wherein upon just occasion the person swearing solemnly calleth God to witness what he asserteth, or promiseth, and to judge him according to the truth or falsehood of what he sweareth. The name of God only is that by which men ought to swear, and therein it is to be used with all holy fear and reverence. Therefore to swear vainly or rashly by that glorious and dreadful name, or to swear at all by any other thing, is sinful and to be abhorred. Yet, as in matters of weight and moment, an oath is warranted by the word of God under the New Testament as well as under the Old, so a lawful oath, being imposed by lawful authority, in such matters ought to be taken. Whosoever taketh an oath ought duly to consider the weightiness of so solemn an act, and therein to avouch nothing but what he is fully persuaded is the truth. Neither may any man bind himself by oath to anything but what is good and just, and what he believeth so to be, and what he is able and resolved to perform. Yet it is a sin to refuse an oath touching anything that is good and just, being imposed by lawful authority. An oath is to be taken in the plain and common sense of the words, without equivocation or mental reservation. They cannot oblige to sin, but in anything not sinful, being taken, it binds to performance, although to a man's own hurt. Nor is it to be violated, although made to heretics or infidels. A vow is of like nature with a promissory oath, and ought to be made with the like religious care, and to be performed with the like faithfulness. It is not to be made to any creature, but to God alone, and that it may be accepted, it is to be made voluntarily, out of faith and conscience of duty, in a way of thankfulness for mercy received, or for the obtaining of what we want, whereby we more strictly bind ourselves to necessary duties, or to other things, so far and so long as they may fitly conduce thereunto. No man may vow to do anything forbidden in the word of God, or what would hinder any duty therein commanded, or which is not in his own power, and for the performance whereof he hath no promise of ability from God. In which respects, popish monastical vows of perpetual single life, professed poverty, and regular obedience are so far from being degrees of higher perfection that they are superstitious and sinful snares in which no Christian may entangle himself. So, I just wanted to go over the scripture citations really fast for paragraph 2, because in what we read from Matthew 5, it, like at face value, it almost seems like Jesus is saying not to swear oaths, like don't take an oath of any kind. But the confession says, yet as in matters of weight and moment, an oath is warranted by the word of God under the New Testament as well as under the Old. So a lawful oath being imposed by lawful authority in such matters ought to be taken. They cite a few different verses that I'll read. Hebrews 6:16, for men verily swear by the greater, and an oath for confirmation is to them an end of all strife. 2 Corinthians 1:23, Moreover, I call God for a record upon my soul, that to spare you I came not as yet unto Corinth. So that's Paul basically swearing an oath to God. Those are from the New Testament. One from the Old Testament, Isaiah 65:16. That he who blesseth himself in the earth shall bless himself in the God of truth, and he that sweareth in the earth shall swear by the God of truth, because the former troubles are forgotten, and because they are hid from mine eyes. There's a few more from the Old Testament. 1 Kings 8:31. If any man trespass against his neighbor, and an oath he laid upon him to cause him to swear, and the oath come before thine altar in this house. They don't finish it, but that's just, I guess, an example. Nehemiah 13:25. And I contended with them, and cursed them, and smote certain of them, and plucked off their hair, and made them swear by God, saying, You shall not give your daughters unto their sons, nor take their daughters unto your sons, or for yourselves. Ezra 10:5. Then arose Ezra and made the chief priests, the Levites, and all Israel to swear that they should do according to this word, and they swear. So just a couple examples of people swearing an oath, but they always swear. They always swear by God. I think what the confession is saying is that when you swear to do something, it's a pretty serious thing. When you make an oath to do something, you should make it by God, and you're held to do it, even if it's to an unbeliever, like it says in paragraph 4. But how exactly that works with the section from Matthew 5, I'm not sure.
Can I read a scripture in Deuteronomy?
Yeah.
Deuteronomy 23:21. If you make a vow to the Lord your God, you shall not delay fulfilling it. For the Lord your God will surely require it of you, and you will be guilty of sin.
It's pretty good.
And I just read last night the last chapter of Leviticus talks about if you vow an offering to the Lord. It wasn't any oath in general. It's if you vow an offering. And then it gives a list of provisions for if you want to withhold that offering. There's a certain price for each thing you might have vowed to give.
The note that Mike read from the Reformation Heritage Bible is kind of basic, but I think it gets the point. It says Christ referred to the Old Covenant commands to keep one's oaths. They cite Leviticus 19, Numbers 30, Deuteronomy 23. He condemned the practice of swearing oaths lightly by avoiding direct reference to God. And they cite Matthew 23 and commended directness, honesty, and integrity in all speech. Yea, yea, nay, nay, which is a quote, I guess, from James 5. The Lord did not forbid all vows, but modeled reverent and truthful speech under oath. Citing chapter 26 of Matthew, Genesis 14, Genesis 21, Joshua 2, 2 Corinthians 1, Hebrews 6, a couple of verses at the confession sites. I'm going to read the section that the cross-reference from Matthew 26. Matthew 23. Starting verse 16. Verse 60 through 22. Woe unto you, you blind guides, which say, Whosoever shall swear by the temple, it is nothing. But whosoever shall swear by the gold of the temple, he is a debtor. Ye fools and blind, for whether is greater, the gold or the temple that sanctifieth the gold? And whoever shall swear by the altar, it is nothing, but whoever sweareth by the gift that is upon it, he is guilty. Ye fools and blind, for whether is greater, the gift or the altar that sanctifieth the gift? Whoso therefore shall swear by the altar sweareth by it and all things thereon. And whoso shall swear by the temple sweareth by it and by him that dwelleth therein. And he that shall swear by heaven sweareth by the throne of God and by him that sitteth thereon.
That kind of tells us what the problems were.
Yeah. See, it kind of reminds me, I think it's in Mark, at least I know that's where I know it's from. It might be in some of the other Gospels, but when he talks about the gift that, like, he calls it Corban. When the Pharisees would they would say all their money was a gift, so they didn't have to give any to their parents. I can't remember where exactly that is, but it seems like it might be relevant as they are putting more emphasis on like the things in the temple rather than like the spiritual nature of it.
Well, it seems to me that in the text from Matthew 23, they shouldn't even be swearing by the temple or by the altar at all. But what Jesus says in Matthew 5 seems to indicate you should only swear by God himself. Because anything less than that is essentially negligible and is pretty much saying that it's dependent on your word only, which should be good, but you can appeal to a higher authority in certain situations.
Can I read the note from the Reformation Heritage from Matthew 23 from that passage?
Yep, I was just going to look at it.
It says, the fourth woe, frivolous oaths. The Pharisees saw some oaths as binding and others as not binding, making fine distinctions that allowed them to swear dishonestly while still adding deceptive weight to their words by invoking sacred objects. Christ showed their reasoning to be flawed and hypocritical, for even invoking things associated with God involves his holiness and honor. Could you guys hear me?
Yeah.
We've got a good example of that later. I don't think you listed this. I don't think the confession cites this, Christian, but it's in 26 when Jesus is talking to Caiaphas. And Caiaphas says, it's verse 63, Caiaphas says, I adjure you by the living God, tell us if you are the Christ, the Son of God. And Jesus said to him, you have said so, but I tell you, from now on, you will see the Son of Man seated at the right hand of power and coming on the clouds of heaven. So he doesn't say, I swear to you by the living God. He just submits to the oath that Caiaphas offers.
Yeah.
He affirms his statement to be true.
Yeah.
Yeah, because up to that point, Jesus was silent, right?
Right.
He had been silent until he used the oath, and he was held to answer because of that.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's really goes to show, like Mike said, and before we started recording, just the total loose way that people swear today, even by God, like they swear to God to do something, but have no intention to do it, or just totally flippant, or they
Or
don't even believe in God.
yeah, or people just use the like just use it in vain, like, oh, well, God's my witness. Like they just say that phrase and it's of no significance what they're actually saying.
A lot of them will be like, "Oh, I swear to God, da 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 da."
Yeah,
Yeah.
When most of the time the people saying that don't even have a relationship with God in the first place.
I don't
well,
see it. I
even in
don't.
like our courts, like people used to swear like that they'd have to put their hand on a Bible and swear to
Right.
tell the truth because it was understood that they were going to be held liable to tell the truth, I guess, to God.
I'm curious about what the is that in the Constitution?
No.
Like
I
where
don't
that comes
know.
from?
To be honest, I need to read it.
Well, I don't think the Constitution.
Because it's just kind of interesting that they like we do that, but then like the Constitution itself doesn't like make an oath to God.
Right. Well, I think that they actually, when they swear people in to like positions, I think they still do
Mhm.
that, where you have to put your hand on a Bible to swear in to some kind of office. Because I remember hearing, I think it was last year, that some Muslim was getting sworn in, and he wouldn't do it unless he could swear in on a Quran, which,
Mm.
and I don't know who it was or the details, but I do know that the person who was explaining the story explained how ludicrous it was because the Quran gives you permission to be deceptive.
Yeah.
What is it, Takira or whatever it's called, where you can lie in order to get the upper hand. So
I didn't know that.
swearing an oath on the Quran is ultimately like you can do whatever you want.
You can get out of it.
So, man,
Yeah, I don't think they even use the Bible anymore in courts. Maybe it depends on the court, but
yeah.
Yeah, maybe. Well, it means nothing to them anyway.
It'd be to their credit if they didn't.
Yeah, probably. Since they don't take it seriously anyways.
mm-hmm.
Sorry, this is a little off topic.
So, now this might be a noob question. Now, would this be one of the proof texts that we would be pulling from in order to establish the defense of political dissent?
Habla, 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 habla.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, this is really like the whole Covenanter dissent from voting thing. That's what this is pretty much based on.
As
Is,
on not swearing oaths.
Yeah,
Right,
because since the person in office is swearing an oath to the Constitution, it's an unlawful oath because it's not sworn to God.
Because it
They don't
offers a
swear to God.
plurality, right?
Yeah, they don't swear to God in their oath, and also the Constitution that they're swearing an oath to doesn't recognize God. So it's
Because it allows for false gods, correct?
yeah.
It allows for false gods, and it also derives its power to govern from the people and not from God.
and not from the word.
Right, so it upholds the people above God, if you'd allow it.
That's what I thought.
Yeah, it's definitely, that is the main thing, is the unlawful oath is the big
I
factor
don't
in
know the
there.
delicate intricacies. Yeah.
I mean, that's why covenanters usually have an oath with, jury duty or being a police officer, for instance, or any position where you have to swear an oath issues because it's an unlawful oath. So the connection of voting is because when you're voting, you're not making you're not making an oath when you're voting, but you're voting someone, so you're causing someone to go in to take an unlawful oath.
So it's
Yeah,
like an argument from good and necessary consequence.
Right. I mean, if we think that we should hold high reverence with oaths that make mention of God, and the Constitution makes denial of Christ, that it would this would be an application of that to avoid making this oath.
Right on.
Yeah, like John, or like Mike mentioned, it's like the voter is not making the oath, but you are basically allowing the person to take the oath, or giving him the ability to do it, and you're also, by voting, you're giving your approval to that person. So you're approving of their office, which part of that is taking the oath.
You might as well be taking the oath with them.
Yeah, pretty much.
Yeah. Absolutely.
I mean, you're not, but you're vouching for them.
Well,
Yes.
if it is a sin, you shouldn't vote for somebody else to do it.
Right.
Yeah.
That'd be like voting for somebody to sin in our eyes if we're convicted by that.
Exactly.
Right. And that's exactly how, like, the RPCNA, they changed their stance, and I don't think they're any longer officially against or for political dissent, but their testimony had always said basically you're causing someone to sin when you vote.
Right.
But it's so, I mean, this is kind of not too off topic, but it's just going off. This is like, I really don't think like America is a Christian nation at all. And a lot of people say that, well, like not too long ago, it was really Christian and whatnot. I mean, first of all, the Constitution itself, makes no mention, which is a huge shift for what had been going on in the colonies. So it's not like it was vague just by mistake or anything like that. And just like I tell you guys, I was listening to that course on Ligonier Connectance going over like the 18th century. No, not 18th century, the 19th century. So the 1800s, and the rise of like all these cults and whatnot, and like there's all these like Christian sects and heresies that arise with Finney and just kind of take over America.
Oh,
It's
he's
pretty
the
scary.
worst.
Yeah, I basically
He really pushed that perfectionism.
basically he was straight up Pelagian and said like you can come to God if you want to. Like there's nothing stop like.
Yeah, but he also pushed that you could once you became a Christian, you'd no longer sin.
Oh, really? Yeah, apparently his systematic theology is just terrible. Like he like hated Presbyterians. Like there's some quotes where I forget what it was, but he's just like straight up say like bashing Presbyterians.
I just want to mention Jesus is kind of basically giving a correct interpretation of the Ten Commandments here. That's what he's been doing, what we've been seeing the past couple weeks. And this oath section is, I think, an explanation of the third commandment. And the confession cites it. It starts off, it cites saying that in an oath, we're required to take an oath to God. It cites Deuteronomy 10:20, "Thou shalt fear the Lord thy God, him shalt thou serve, and to him shalt thou cleave, and swear by his name." Then they quote the third commandment, Exodus 20:7, "Thou shalt not take the name of the Lord thy God in vain, for the Lord will not hold him guiltless that taketh his name in vain." That's kind of similar language to what we were reading in Matthew 23. Is he said, if you swear by the offering and not by the altar, then you are guilty. So this is definitely tied to the third commandment. But I think so is the point here, is he saying basically avoid oaths unless it's really serious? Because if you take an oath that you can't fulfill, or an oath that you have no intention of fulfilling, you come under condemnation.
That's certainly the case. I would probably add that if you have a reputation for not keeping your word on things, then you shouldn't use an oath at all, because then you're kind of defeating the purpose of it and doing what the Pharisees were doing, with the attitude that what you say isn't binding unless it's in the form of an oath, has got attached to it.
In my you guys, can you guys hear me?
Yeah.
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 My Wycliffe commentary. I'm not going to read all of it, but a little section says, For God is still implicated when men invoke heaven, earth, or Jerusalem, and even swearing by one's own head implicates the one who holds the power over it.
You're doing it wrong, Mike.
I didn't feel like doing the Tanner pour. That's too
What are we
much.
talking about?
What are you pouring, Mike?
This is called Boot Tread. It's basically the Aldi version of Fat Tire.
You gonna finish it? You gonna finish it, man?
I finished the first one. There's one on my counter I didn't finish.
Oh yeah.
Oh man, I think there's just a gunshot.
Hey, Josiah,
Yeah.
we're actually doing real stuff here, bud.
Okay. Bye.
We're talking about covenantal theology.
Yeah, we're talking about covenanters.
Oh, I better go then. That's pretty boring. I'm
So
at
does
the
anybody?
supermarket. You want to choose a beer?
Don't you have to work?
Yeah, I do.
All right. Say a Bible study break and help Josiah choose a beer.
Have a look here. Oh, there we go. What's that? Carlsberg?
Wait, this isn't the Sabbath for you, right? I'm not causing you to...
I'm causing you to sin because it's your Sabbath. Oh, there's Ryan's favorite, the Heineken.
There's some Blue Moon.
There's some fake craft beer. This
Get
one's
it
good,
for
the Nest. You should try that.
I can't see it.
Nest beer. So,
Nest beer.
Josiah,
yeah. Yeah?
get a 40 of Old English.
What?
There you go.
Get a 40 ounce of Old English.
Is there
What's
a
that?
Yoshi? Is there a Yoshi beer or anything like that? It's got Yoshi on it.
How many,
Pokemon beer.
how many
Have you
Yankees
tried this? You know this beer?
What is it? Lowen?
Lowenbrow?
Yeah.
Nope.
You know it?
Oh, hey,
I've heard
have
of
you
it.
had that, is that Hogarden? Have you had that?
No, I haven't had that.
That's pretty good.
Yeah?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Cool. That's all. I
prices?
gotta go.
Alright, get some Hogarden.
Oh, my train's coming. Better go.
Alright, so does anybody know the context of James 5:12? He says, But above all things,
Let's take a look.
my brethren, swear not, neither by heaven, neither by earth, neither by any other oath, but let your yea be yea, and your nay, nay, lest ye fall into condemnation.
I believe it's saying just keep your word and don't swear on oaths.
Because it seems like it's just dropped in the middle of like a bunch of random stuff.
James 5.
James 5 verse 12.
Well, he's following, like, he's going down a list of, like in verse 9, like, grudge not against another, lest you be condemned. Behold, the judge standeth before the door. Then he gives examples to the prophets who have spoken in the name of the Lord for an example of suffering, affliction, and patience. Behold, we count them happy which endure. Ye have heard the patience of Job, and have seen the end of the Lord, that the Lord is very pitiful and of tender mercy. And then it says, but above all things, swear not, neither by heaven, neither by the earth, neither by any other oath. I think essentially it's saying, we saw that the prophets spoke in the name of the Lord, and they benefited from doing so. And I think that when we speak truthful, we're speaking essentially in the name of the Lord by being representatives of the Lord. And so we're to be truthful in our speech.
Mm-hmm. Truth and honesty and unlawful oath, taking an unlawful oath isn't being honest or truthful, and it's also taking the Lord's name in vain.
He doesn't say don't swear by God himself.
Right.
Specifically. But he does say above all at the beginning of it, so it's really important, whatever he is trying to say.
I mean, it's basically the
Right.
exact same language as Matthew 5. Let your yea be yea, and your nay, nay, lest you fall into temptation.
I've got the notes on James 5:12 from the Reformation Study Bible from Ligonier. It says, the footnote says, only God can be an omnipresent, omniscient witness to oaths and vows. So to call upon mere objects as witnesses is to reject the Creator in favor of that which is created. Just and godly vows are not prohibited in Scripture because they form a vital part of all covenants.
Yeah, that's good. I think it pulls out the point of Matthew 23.
So the name you invoke in an oath is part of the proceeding of that oath. And only God can do that perfectly.
I think here's another relevant verse, Ecclesiastes 5:4. When thou vowest a vow unto God, defer not to pay it, for he hath no pleasure in fools. Pay that which thou hast vowed. But it is better that thou shouldst not vow than that thou should vow and not pay. Suffer not thy mouth to cause thy flesh to sin, neither say thou before the angel that it was an error. Wherefore should God be angry at thy voice and destroy the work of thy hands?
That reminds me a lot of what James says about the tongue at the beginning of his book and all the damage it can cause.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a lot of good references in this chapter of the Confession. A couple from Psalms. Psalm 61:8. So will I sing praise unto thy name forever, that I may daily perform my vows. Psalm 66:13. I will go into thy house with burnt offerings. I will pay thee my vows, which my lips have uttered and my mouth hath spoken when I was in trouble. Psalm 76:11. Vow and pay unto the Lord your God. Let all that be round about him bring presents unto him that ought to be feared. Psalm 50:14. Offer unto God thanksgiving and pay thy vows unto the Most High. Psalm 132:2. How he sware unto the Lord and vowed unto the mighty God of Jacob. Surely I will not come into the tabernacle of my house, nor go up into my bed. I will not give sleep to mine eyes, or slumber to mine eyelids, until I find a place for the Lord, an habitation for the mighty God of Jacob. So, yeah, there's just from the Psalms. There's tons of other references that I didn't read yet. So yeah, I think that's the main point of Matthew 5, because there's no way that Jesus is, basically saying you should never do all this other stuff that's already been written in the Old Testament. But he's given a correct application of it, and I think what we read in Matthew 23 is pretty essential to understanding the context, like Joshua said. Because, like with a lot of other things, the Pharisees were doing stuff or making it look like they were performing righteousness. They were bowing to things in the temple, but they weren't actually bowing to God, or maybe they thought they weren't, but Jesus condemns them. Well, that's pretty much all I had. Pretty good. It kind of helps me understand that section a little bit better.
I don't think I've heard that text preached on before.
I'm sure I have at some point, but I don't remember. I mean, it's a hard section.
Maybe I have, but knowing where I grew up, it would just turn into a general exhortation, to be honest.
Yeah.
And which is good, but that's not all we're dealing with here. And
yeah, I guess it really, you kind of have to have that understanding already of the nature of oaths and things like that.
Yeah.
From the Old Testament.
I've heard James be used as a blanket prohibition on all oaths, which clearly isn't what he's intending, because we see Jesus submit to an oath and Paul take an oath and all of those folks you mentioned in the Old Testament.
Shane's back.
What up?
You got any more thoughts to share?
Yeah, I mean, I just think I liked what you're saying. I don't know where you went after it cut out on me, but on the application of it through Matthew 5 of kind of expanding upon the commandments, I think he kind of like lays it out like this is what it said and this is how you should be thinking about it, you know, rather than trying to interpret on our own. He kind of gives us he guides us how we should be interpreting his law. And I think it's go ahead.
I think it's a good to see the example that we see from like the Covenanters in their national covenants. Like they applied this to the nation.
Right.
So like in the covenants, they like everyone who signed it, which would be like representatives from the church and the representatives from the government, would both together swear an oath to God to basically they would swear an oath to God to honor God in their nation, like God would be the God of that nation, and that they would uphold the commands that God gave in the Bible, and the government was responsible to do it as well. So
essentially, Christ is king, and they were living it as Christ is king.
And coming from this context, it was a pretty serious thing. That's why it was such a big deal when the government would break the covenant. I mean, they were essentially breaking the third commandment, and you can see the serious nature of this. Why there was they would actually fight and stuff, and have these big wars between the government and the church, and stuff like that.
But see, that was the problem, right? Because ultimately, we still have sinful man trying to run the government. So, that's where it falls apart, right? Because, I mean, as much as we want to honor God, we're still sinful.
Well, I think it's a good example, but
they were swearing oaths to God, but could they really uphold those oaths to God?
It's a good discussion, and I think that's a point that some people have made that kind of disagree with the Covenanter position on things. And I think maybe we're talking about how the Covenanters put this into practice in their national covenants with the governments.
Okay.
Essentially, they were swearing oaths together.
What's the objection?
Well, I had said that ultimately, it's great, because Christ is king and they're upholding that. Mm-hmm. But ultimately, so the church and the governments are swearing an oath to God, but since we are sinful man, we can't uphold those oaths. And so that's where things fall apart, and where we have that's where there was problems in the covenant of nations.
I think what they'd say is, they're not standards that they're you confess that standard because it can be upheld, even though imperfectly at times. It's not like if.
But I mean, ultimately, if we're swearing an oath to God, and at any point during that time we fall short, then ultimately we're breaking the third commandment. And I mean, that's because we're living as God's standard at that point.
Mhm.
And Covenanters also held, now correct me if I'm wrong, I'm trying to understand it all, also held that the, the breaking of the first table was also punishable by the magistrate.
Yes.
Yes.
So breaking of an unlawful oath, like along with the third commandment, would be punishable by the magistrate, the same ones that would be breaking that oath.
Yeah, well, obviously the magistrate's not going to punish itself for if it breaks
Well,
the oath.
Right. So, but that's what I'm saying is like, because I think it's great. I think the Covenanters model is, but is that kind of where you would find the corruption and have it kind of fall apart?
Yeah, like I was starting to say, I think if we look back to those times, those are good examples, but they may have not been the best times for practices like that to be, actually applied. I think that, it's a good thing to do, but I don't think that it's really going to work until, more people are converted and the people in the government are actually Christians that want to obey the third commandment, and things like that. Because, even back then, that stuff, like the Solemn League and Covenant, was only in effect for a couple of years before the king broke it.
Right.
Um, so, you have somebody who's really wicked in power, like now, like if Obama were to enter into covenant with the church, how long is he going to keep it? Something that.
What a
Um,
dog.
so it's like I think it's something that is a good thing to do, and we have examples of it in the Old Testament, but I don't think it's something that is going to actually work until a future point when a lot of people are converted and people actually want to put these practices into place in their society and stuff like that. That's
Oh,
kind of a
absolutely. But I
misconception.
mean, but
And I
even
don't.
back then, um, a more godly position to make it work, and it still didn't. You know what I mean? And I'm not gonna sell it by any
Well, a
means
lot of
because I
them.
completely respect the Covenanter position. I just see it in practice being almost
Unattainable.
out of reach. Right, absolutely.
I think a lot of it. I mean, it's definitely hard to see. I think a lot of it back then was,
Like I'm
at
not
least for the government, it was more political. Like,
closer to Covenanter than anything, but
yeah, like I think if you look at the history,
a hard time seeing it happen.
a lot of them were like they would have big fights and wars with the Roman Catholics. Like Protestants and Catholics would fight, and then the Protestants would come out on top, and they would basically be the church of the country, and then the king would kind of like ally with them, and that's why he would sign the covenant. It was more like a political alliance, not like the king didn't really care to do it. It was just the most beneficial for him at the time. And then you see like when he would make another alliance with a Roman Catholic country, or something would happen to where he could say, oh, the Catholics are kind of getting more power, then he would break the covenant, side with them. So if as far as the king side,
Pragmatic.
like the church was trying to perform what they thought they were supposed to do, but the king was mainly looking out for political advantage. Um, so I think
So
it
that's
is.
why, like, I mean, it seems like it was kind of like pragmatism, obviously, and Paul's gonna do that. So I mean, at what point I could see it actually working if maybe even like if the church wasn't the church and the state, you know what I mean?
Say that again. You're kind of cutting in and out.
Politicians are always going to be politicians. So I mean, is there a form of it that the church actually running things over and not the state?
No. The way the Covenanter position works is you have the state and the church as separate spheres, but they basically work together. So like the church advises the government on what the law is and what they should do, and you kind of see that from the Old Testament. I want to say it's in Deuteronomy. I can't remember exactly where, but it basically talks about when the king comes into power. The priest would give him the book of the law, and he would read the law. So the priest would be like a advisor to the king as far as what the law requires from the Bible, and it was the government's responsibility to execute the law because the church doesn't have the authority to the church doesn't have judicial authority. The furthest as far as like a punishment type thing that a church can do is excommunication. But the actual punishment for crimes, that's up to the government. But so the church should tell the government what the law requires, but it's still on the government to actually do it.
Okay.
And the government should protect the church, like Romans 13 goes through. The government is supposed to be a minister for the church's good, to reward good and punish evil. So it's like two teams working together to form like one unit.
It's like that's why there's overlap, because I mean they both have the same goal of the advancement of the gospel, and I think what's happening nowadays, and most Reformed people would say who aren't Covenanters, kind of define good and evil in this kind of sense of only life, liberty, and property. Like they really limit what the state is, which people who are who hold that belief the most are usually a lot of people in the OPC are the Reformed Two Kingdoms people who have that that sharp divide between the church and the state, where the state just kind of vaguely should help support life and the freedom to practice religion, and they would probably what I find interesting, because most of those people are probably like Van Tillians, so they're really steeped in precept, and what's one of the main things that's always precept. It's how we define good and evil. Good is what's within God's character, where it's evil is outside of God's character. You can't just have this like vague idea of what good are we pursuing? Should the state be pursuing? It's the good, the advancement of the gospel, that the church would be able to flourish, and that the gospel would go forth, which goes forth through the church, and that evil is punished, and the evil. Just like the kind of this vague concept of life over property, but.
So I guess, would it be hard? Would a good place to start is to get an understanding of the different views on the kingdom aspect?
Yes.
Like whether it be like the historical two kingdom model versus like the Kuyperian model and radical two kingdom or whatever.
Right.
I don't understand all that.
Right. I know that's a little confusing for me still, because even within
where would I look?
There's a couple different views. But
is there like a good resource for all that?
I know Paul Barth had written something in Reformed Theonomy website that was good. It was pretty big.
But it really didn't cover all the views, right?
Right, because within Covenanters, there's two. They both think that so on one side there's covenanters who would say that Christ, it's all about what is the extent of God's Christ's kingdom. Some would say that Christ's kingdom is only over the church, and then there were other ones who would say that Christ's kingdom is over the church and the state. They both can agree with all the covenanter views, and they both come to the same conclusions. Could look at the same verses with the same conclusions, but one of them kind of says that Christ's kingdom's over the church, where the state should still serve Christ, just like a family should serve Christ. If a family serves Christ, there's a good chance that the gospel will go forth through that family, and the church will flourish by a family being faithful to Christ. And you can apply that to the state. There's a sort of federal holiness when the state serves Christ. But then there's other connectors who would explicitly say that Christ's kingdom, Christ has mediatorial dominion over the church and the state. So, but they both kind of came to the same conclusions. The article that Paul writes is kind of like, he said he tried to kind of keep a middle ground there. But
I remember
Yeah,
reading that a while ago, but I didn't. It didn't click with me because I didn't know that much about like the Covenanter like model or anything. You know what I mean? Like it's totally
Yeah.
new. That was like the first thing I ever read on kingdom theology.
Yeah,
Hey, we
kind of
can
the
keep-
two big works that represent each side is, if you read Messiah the Prince by William Symington, that
Yeah.
kind of describes the Covenanter view of Christ having mediatorial dominion over the church and the state, and so it's kind of that perspective. And then Aaron's Rod Blossoming by George Gillespie would probably be a good representation of that other view.
Where does
Again,
go ahead
Lex
and,
fall into play?
Gillespie would fall into what I said, how Christ's kingdom is over the church, but there's still an obligation of the state to serve Christ, and there's a sort of federal holiness that can be seen when the state serves Christ, just like there's a federal holiness seen when a family submits to Christ,
Okay.
even though Christ doesn't specifically have a kingdom over the family.
But I guess my question would be, and I'm really new to the theonomic system, well, fairly new. I'm still studying it. How is that applied? How would that be applied now? Like, how would we go from where we are now to saying, let's apply the civil law
Yeah.
over our nation?
Hey guys, real fast.
Yeah.
I'm
What's up,
gonna go ahead
Christian?
and, I'm gonna go ahead and turn off the live broadcast. We can keep talking about this, but just in case anybody was watching it later, since we're kind of getting into a little bit different topic, which is fine. I'm gonna stay on here and talk a little bit. But if anybody watching later has any questions, they can talk to us in the group. We will be happy to share any resources. So we'll go ahead and turn off the broadcast. Squad up. This is a good study. Definitely helped me out. I hope it helped out a few other people.
Absolutely.
Yeah, good discussion.